After ending a toxic relationship, a woman starts dating someone she met online, but strange details about her life begin to surface in their conversations. She soon realizes her ex has been impersonating her new match, manipulating and stalking her all over again. I thought I was finally moving on. After a few months of healing from a toxic breakup with my ex, Michael, I was ready to start dating again. Tinder seemed like a good place to meet new people, and I quickly matched with someone who seemed perfect for me. His name was Alex. He was funny, thoughtful, and our conversations felt natural. We talked for hours on end, and I found myself smiling again for the first time in months. At first, everything seemed normal. You know how it is. You talk about hobbies, swap funny stories, maybe flirt a bit. Alex and I clicked right away. He had this sarcastic sense of humor that reminded me of the good parts of being with Michael but without all the drama. And he actually listened when I talked, which was something Michael never did. We texted non-stop for about 2 weeks before we made plans to meet up. It wasn't anything fancy, just grabbing coffee at a local cafe. When I saw him in person, I was relieved. He looked just like his photos, and I wasn't being catfished. We spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and I remember thinking how crazy it was that I could feel this comfortable with someone new after everything with Michael. It almost felt too good to be true. I felt hopeful, like maybe I was finally getting my life back on track. But that's when things started getting strange. After our first date, Alex sent me this message that left me feeling uneasy. He casually mentioned something about my favorite coffee order. You'd think, no big deal, right? Except I had never told him what I like to drink. I chalked it up to a lucky guess, but in the back of my mind, something just didn't sit right. Still, I ignored it, convinced I was overthinking. Then more little things started happening. He'd bring up a movie I had watched the night before, something I hadn't even mentioned to him. At first, I thought maybe I had posted about it online without remembering. But no, I hadn't posted anything. He knew I was close with my sister Emma and randomly asked how she was doing, except I'd never told him her name. I started feeling paranoid, wondering how he knew these details. I mean, who wouldn't? I kept asking myself if I'd somehow let this info slip, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. A few days later, I decided to confront him, just to clear the air, you know? I asked him how he knew all these personal things about me. He played it off, saying I probably mentioned them at some point, but my gut told me something was off. It wasn't just the details, it was the way he talked, like he already knew me on a deeper level than our brief time together would allow. That's when I made the connection to Michael. Michael had been controlling and obsessive during our relationship. He was the type to stalk my social media, show up unannounced, and dig into my private life even when I told him to stop. Could it be that he was behind this? I mean, the breakup wasn't pretty, and he hadn't exactly left me alone right away. So, one night, I decided to test my theory. I messaged Alex, asking if he knew where I went to college. It was something I'd never told him, and wasn't easy to find online. His response? He casually mentioned the name of the school, like it was common knowledge. That's when my stomach dropped. I didn't respond. I felt sick, like I had been duped all over again. It couldn't be a coincidence. I realized, in that moment, that Alex wasn't just some random guy I met on Tinder. He knew too much, and I knew exactly where it was coming from. Michael. Panicking, I scrolled through Alex's profile again, looking for any signs that would confirm my suspicions. And that's when I noticed it. The small details I had overlooked before, the phrases he used, the way he structured his sentences. It was all too familiar. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. Alex wasn't real. Michael had been pretending to be Alex the whole time. I confronted him the next day, feeling a mix of anger and fear. When I called him out, his response chilled me to the bone. He didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed. He told me it had all been part of a plan. He wanted to prove to me that I couldn't trust anyone, that I would always come back to him in the end. He had been watching me, using this fake profile to manipulate me, just to make me feel vulnerable. And the worst part? He sounded so casual about it, like this whole thing was some kind of sick game. I blocked him immediately and reported everything to the police, but the psychological damage was already done. I felt violated, like I couldn't trust anyone ever again. Even though I had taken legal action, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of Michael still lurking in the background, waiting for his next move. This whole experience made me realize just how vulnerable we can be when we open ourselves up to the wrong people, especially online. Trust is something that should never be taken for granted, and we need to be careful who we let into our lives. You never truly know who's behind the screen. After meeting a charming man on Tinder, a woman quickly realizes that he's not who he claims to be. As she digs deeper, she uncovers his disturbing past of stalking and using fake identities to manipulate women, forcing her to take drastic action before becoming his next victim. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to spend some time with. After being single for a while, I decided to give Tinder a try, just to see what was out there. I wasn't expecting much, but that's where I matched with Tom. He seemed like the real deal, handsome, charming, with an air of mystery that drew me in. From the beginning, our conversations flowed effortlessly. He was sweet, funny, and had a great job. Tom was everything I thought I wanted. We started messaging every day, then talking on the phone. He seemed so into me, always wanting to know how my day was, what I was doing, and what I liked. It was flattering, to be honest. We finally met up after a week of texting, and I was pleasantly surprised. He was even better looking in person, well-dressed and attentive. We had dinner, laughed over drinks, and I left the date feeling giddy. This was the first time in a long time I felt a genuine connection with someone. But things moved fast, maybe too fast. After just a couple of dates, he started insisting that we meet only at my place. I didn't think much of it at first, figuring maybe he liked the privacy. But looking back, that should have been my first red flag. I tried to suggest meeting at other spots, restaurants, bars, but he'd always have an excuse. Eventually, I gave in and figured, why not? At first, everything seemed fine. He'd come over, bring a bottle of wine, and we'd watch movies or cook dinner. He was always attentive, always eager to please. But after a few weeks, I started to notice little things that didn't quite add up. For one, his stories about his job were inconsistent. He told me he was in finance, but he always seemed to have different details about where he worked or what exactly he did. I chalked it up to him just being vague. Maybe he didn't like talking about work. But it wasn't just that. Whenever I asked about his family, he would either change the subject or give vague answers. He claimed to be close to his sister, but he never mentioned her by name or shared any specific details. The more I tried to get to know him, the more he seemed to dodge my questions. One night, while we were watching a movie, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen. He had left it unlocked on the coffee table while he went to the bathroom. Now, I'm not the type to snoop. Seriously, I never do this. But something made me curious. There was a folder on his phone titled Favorites, and it was filled with pictures. At first, I thought maybe it was just a collection of random things, but when I looked closer, I froze. The photos were all of me, and not just normal, casual pictures. Some of them were clearly taken without my knowledge. There was one of me walking to my car, another of me at the grocery store. There were even a few from our first date, where I didn't even notice him taking his phone out. My heart was pounding. Why would he have pictures like that? It didn't make sense. I put his phone down as quickly as I could and pretended nothing happened, but the whole time my mind was racing. Who was Tom? I felt this sudden urge to throw him out of my apartment right then and there, but I didn't want to tip him off. I needed to figure out what was going on first. The next day, I decided to do some digging. I started by trying to find his social media profiles. He had mentioned being on Instagram, but when I searched, I couldn't find a single trace of him online. No Facebook, no LinkedIn, nothing. It was like he didn't exist. I even reverse searched his phone number, but that led nowhere too. Everything about him seemed off, and the more I looked, the more I realized I didn't know him at all. That's when I decided to do something I should have done from the beginning. I Googled his name, and that's when everything fell apart. The name he gave me wasn't real. I found news articles from other states, places he had mentioned in passing. The articles described a man who matched Tom's description, but with a different name. He had been wanted in multiple states for stalking and harassment. Apparently, he'd been using fake names to meet women, get close to them, and then stalk them relentlessly after the relationship ended. There were even reports of him breaking into their homes, following them to work, and taking pictures, just like the ones I found on his phone. I felt sick. This wasn't some misunderstanding. Tom, or whatever his real name was, had been targeting me from the start. I didn't know how long he'd been watching me before we even met. I started to think about all the times we'd been together at my place, all the times I let him in without questioning it. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't confront him alone, so I called the police. They took my statement and asked me to stay somewhere safe for a few days while they looked into it. I ended up staying with a friend, too afraid to go back to my apartment. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They had arrested him, and sure enough, he was wanted in multiple states under different names. I wasn't the only one he had been targeting. They found files on his computer with pictures and details about other women, just like he had with me. He had been cataloging our lives like we were his prey. It's horrifying how someone can create an entirely fake persona and slip into your life like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I never thought I'd be the victim of something like this, but it taught me a valuable lesson. You can't always trust what you see online, and sometimes the person sitting across from you isn't who they claim to be. I'm just thankful I trusted my instincts before it was too late.